Hey everybody, in today's video we're going to take a look at the Z series 35mm F1.8. I'm going to be directly comparing that to the F-mount 35mm 1.8 and the F-mount 35mm 1.4. Okay, what this video is it's looking at the picture quality of the 35mm Z series lens versus the F-mount 35mm lenses to see if we can see picture quality differences across the board. I've had a great time shooting with the 85mm lens, which I have over here, and I'll get back to that in the future. This video right now is being recorded on a Z6 with the 35mm F1.8 prime, just to give you an idea of what the performance of the lens would look like during video. So what I've done is I've got a setup of shots, and I'm going to take different shots on the same camera first of all. So we're going to look at all of the 35mm lenses on the same camera. So obviously 35 1.8 Z series on a Z7. And then we're going to look at the Z7 with the FTZ adapter, 35 1.8 F-mount, and then the 35 F1.4. Then what I'll do, because a lot of people wanted to see this in some of my earlier videos, is I will change the camera to a D850. So we will compare Z7 with its 35 versus D850 with the 35mm set on a D850 to see if we can see a difference. That kind of then gets rid of anybody thinking about the FTZ changing picture quality, which it doesn't, but I did have some people in previous videos kind of think that it might do. So that's just to cover that off, just in case. So we're going to head over to Lightroom. We'll have a look at some of the shots in Lightroom and see if we can tell some differences between 35, the F1.8 Z series, the 35 1.8 F-mount, and the 1.4. Okay, so here we are. We're first of all going to look at the 35mm 1.8 versus the F-mount 35mm 1.8. As always, I'm just going to show you the picture quality, and I want you to make your own mind up about which one you think is better, which one you think is sharper, that type of stuff. You might feel that one has more character than the other. It's entirely up to you. I'll talk about kind of what I see in front of me, and I'll talk about kind of what my feelings are, but I want you guys just to be able to kind of make your own conclusions from what you can see as well. So on the left-hand side, we have the Z series 35mm 1.8, and on the right-hand side, we have the F-mount 35mm f1.8. So what we'll do is we'll just go look at them first of all at 1:1. So here we are at 1:1, and straight away we can see that the Z series lens on the left-hand side is sharper at 1:1 than the F-mount lens, which is on the right-hand side. So if we go and have a look at 2:1, so you can see straight away that at 2:1 the level of sharpness loss from the f1.8 F-mount lens is becoming more significant. If we compare kind of the center cap as well, we can just see that there's a bit more detail and sharpness from the Z series on the left. Also, purple fringing is starting to kind of raise its head in the F-mount 35mm 1.8 lens. So in terms of out of focus areas, you can also see that we're getting purple fringing and also a lot of green fringing around the outside of the top of the camera, and that is non-existent in the Z series 35mm, where there is quite a lot in the F-mount 1.8 lens. To kind of show you that in a bit more detail, if we have a look at this out of focus area here, you can see there's a bit, maybe a very tiny bit of color fringing on the Z series lens, but nowhere near as much as you can see in the F-mount 35mm. They're both at 1.8 here, so both wide open, so it kind of gives you a good look of what the depth of field would look like as well. The key thing here is just that the color fringing that you get, this is just slightly off center, and again you can just see the change in the level of sharpness. So on the left hand side we have the 35mm 1.8 Z, and on the right hand side we have the 35mm 1.8 F-mount. Right, so here we have both the 35mm f1.8 lenses stopped down to 2.8. On the left is the Z series, and on the right is the F-mount. So let's take a look at their picture quality. So with both lenses stopped down to 2.8, you can see quite clearly that the sharpness difference at 1:1 is negligible. The F-mount has obviously got a lot sharper by stopping it down to 2.8 compared to the Z series, which was equally as sharp wide open at 1.8. If we zoom into 2:1, okay, so at 2:1, the Z series lens does become sharper, and we can see that detail, but that was difficult to see at 1:1. So, if you know that you're not going to be cropping in heavily, it might not be as big of a real world difference for you. So again, here we can see that the Z series lens on the left hand side is sharper than the F-mount lens on the right hand side when both stop down to 2.8. So depth of field, we obviously noted that when the F-mount lens was wide open at 1.8, there was quite a lot of color fringing, and that still does exist. So we've still got some green color fringing and purple fringing in the out of focus areas on the F-mount 35mm lens, and it's almost non-existent on the Z series lens in the depth of field. We can also see here that level of sharpness just off center is significantly better on the Z series than it is on the 35. So here we are, both lenses stopped down to f8. So we've got the Z series on the left hand side and the F-mount 35 1.8 on the right hand side. And at f8, the picture quality difference at 2:1. The Z-mount lens is a tiny bit sharper. The 35 lens is the F-mount lens is just a bit softer around kind of these white edges here. Yeah, it's almost indistinguishable. Just a very quick look, just slightly off center. You can see though that as we move further away from the center of the image, the F-mount lens does start to get a bit softer than the Z-mount lens. For depth of field, we're obviously at f8 here, so there's not a massive amount of depth of field, but we can see that the color fringing has disappeared as well. Overall, between the 35mm 1.8 Z and the 35mm 1.8 F-mount, the Z series lens is sharper and is more controlled in terms of color fringing, and that becomes massively apparent when you're wide open at 1.8. But when you stop down to kind of f8, the difference becomes less. But as I mentioned, who buys a 1.8 lens to shoot it at stop down to 5.6 or f8 all the time? Right, so here we have the Z series 35mm 1.8 on the left hand side and the F-mount 35mm 1.4 on the right hand side. We're currently just zoomed in at 2:1, and you can see straight away that the 35mm 1.4 is really struggling with color fringing. The Z series lens is at 1.8 and the F-mount is at 1.4. But color fringing is a really big problem for the 1.4 lens. You can see there's a lot of green and purple fringing, a lot of purple fringing around here. Obviously that is easy to remove, but I just wanted to show you what the lenses look like straight out of camera raw files. We could go and remove that color fringing if we wanted to. So just have a quick look at sharpness and detail, and we can see that to me anyway, there's not a lot in there, but the Z series 1.8 is sharper. Keep in mind that it is obviously wide open at 1.8 and the 1.4 is wide open at 1.4, but there just seems to be a lot more detail and a bit more contrast in the Z series 1.8 than there is in the F-mount 1.4. That obviously depends on what you prefer in your images. Just have a quick look at depth of field over in the corner here, and we can see that the D5 that's in this corner, again, is really kind of affected by a lot of purple and green color fringing. And also, we are obviously comparing f1.4 on the right-hand side to f1.8 on the left-hand side. Now, obviously, the 1.4 is letting more light in, but in terms of the shape of the depth of field, there's not a huge difference. We can clearly see that this is more out of focus than it is on the left-hand side here, but there's not a huge difference between these two lenses in terms of f1.4 and f1.8 in terms of depth of field. We can also see that over on this side of the frame, again, the F-mount 1.4 is just really struggling with color fringing. And I do feel like, I don't know, if we look at this area here, I do feel like the 1.8 lens is maybe a bit smoother in terms of its depth of field in this particular shot than the 1.4 because of these it looks like these small circles overlaid over each other. So here we have the Z series lens wide open at 1.8 and the F-mount 1.4 stopped down to 1.8 to see kind of any difference in sharpness. So we can see sharpness and detail wise the 1.8 Z series lens. The 1.8 Z series lens does just look a bit sharper. It's very close, but I just feel like it is the one that is just a tad sharper. The F1.4 lens, stopped down to 1.8 here on the right, is still suffering with color fringing in the depth of field. So if we compare this out of focus area over here on the right hand side of the shot, we can see straight away there's quite a huge difference in the depth of field. So even when the 1.4 is stopped down to 1.8, you'll still notice a lot of kind of purple and green color fringing that just is almost non-existent in the Z series lens. And extreme kind of corner sharpness as well. I feel like the Z series lens is performing much better than the F-mount lens as well. Right, so here we have both lenses stopped down to 2.8. So again, Z series on the left, F-mount on the right. So for me, it's quite a tough one actually. I do feel like the Z series lens is a tiny bit sharper, but it's not a massive difference. It's not night and day. Yeah. Just think there's a bit more detail and sharpness in the Z series lens than there is in the F-mount lens. Both of them stop down to 2.8. So in terms of sharpness, kind of center sharpness, almost identical. I mean, how negligible that would be in real world situations, I'm not sure, but gives you an idea. So let's have a quick look at kind of depth of field. Okay, so it's good to see that the F-mount 1.4 has less fringing in terms of color fringing in the shot. There's still a tiny bit of green going on around here, but nothing major. So kind of for me, that kind of then solidifies that the F-mount 1.4, if you want to get rid of kind of all color fringing and things like that, you're going to have to start stopping that down to F2, F2.8 to get rid of that, or you get rid of it in post. I would say that the Z series lens does look sharper towards the edge of the frame by quite a way. Again, it just appears, especially over on this area here, that the depth of field is just a bit smoother on the Z series lens. But I do really believe that that's a personal preference, really. Some of you might prefer this look, some of you might prefer this look. It does vary quite drastically from photographer to photographer. Right, so as promised, what I was going to do is show you the 35mm lenses on a D850 and on a Z7 to show you that the FTZ makes no difference in terms of picture quality. So what we have here on the left hand side is the 35mm 1.4 on a Z7 via the FTZ, and on the right hand side is the 35mm 1.4 on a D850. And you can see that kind of sharpness and picture quality is identical between the two. There's a slight difference in white balance. You can see that the Z7 is slightly shifted towards green, whereas the D850 is a bit more purple. But it does show you that the tests that I've done and the FTZ is not going to give you any change in picture quality. So the way that they look on the Z7 is the way that they would look on a D850. And then just to kind of confirm out of focus areas, so they are again completely identical. The 35mm 1.4 lens on the Z7 on the left and on a D850 on the right hand side, same shutter speed, same aperture, f1.4, same ISO, tripod in the same place. We get the exact same results. There's a bit of color difference, but that would be expected. But sharpness and detail is the same. I hope you find this video useful. If you do have any questions, please leave them in the comments below. If you are particularly interested in Z series stuff, then please do subscribe. There's a lot of interesting stuff on the way, so I wouldn't want you to miss all the videos that I've got coming up as well. Thank you very much for watching. Goodbye.